Hi Islanders, this is Hana and welcome back to my island. Today I want to talk about something Korean called credentialism. It's the idea that the name of your university follows you for the rest of your life. Last time we talked about the Netflix show Teach Your Lesson and your response really moved me. I could feel how much you care about the next generation, how much you worry about them, and how much you want to find hope and real alternatives for them. So today, let's go a little deeper. Let's talk about Korea's hunger for education and this thing called credentialism. Shall we begin? In last video, I talked about this. In the summer of 1994, a Korean group called 서태지 and Boys, 서태지와 아이들, released a song called Classroom Idea. I was in elementary school when I heard it. It wasn't just a hit song. It pointed straight at Korea's exam competition and our one-size-fits-all schooling. For that time, it was social criticism more direct than anyone had heard before. Millions of teenagers memorized the lyrics. Others were caught off guard. Broadcasters even limited how often it could air. That song was a crack in Korean society back then. I was young. I didn't yet know what exam hell would look like when it came for me. But somehow I just knew. I knew I would never fit nearly into this system. And I believed something else too, something a little naive. I thought the older kids who grew up with this song would become adults, and by then, all of this would be different. More than 30 years have passed. The kids who grew up with this song, my generation and the ones just ahead of us, are parents now. And we are putting our children through tutoring that's even harsher than what we went through ourselves. In Daechi, the most famous private education neighborhood in Seoul, a 20-year plan begins the moment a child is born, a plan to get them into medical school or law school. People joke about 4-year-olds and 7-year-olds sitting for exams, except it isn't really a joke. That song begged us not to bury our youth in a dark classroom. And 30 years later, we rebuilt that classroom with our own hands. Thicker, harder. Here's the strange part. The Suneung, Korea's national college entrance exam, the one that shrinks a student's whole future into a one single day, was first held around the time that song came out. The language of resistance and the system it was fighting were born almost together. And 30 years on, one became a beloved song you belt out at a noraebang, Korea's own private singing room, with your friends. The other only grew deeper roots. I spent a long time trying to understand why. Korea's credentialism isn't something new that industrialization created in the 60s and 70s. For 500 years, under the Joseon dynasty, there was a national civil service exam. It was the only official way to change your social standing. One exam decides one life. That structure has been carved into us, like DNA, for centuries. The Suneung is the old Joseon exam, wearing new clothes. And there is the memory of Japanese colonial rule when education was both resistance and survivor. And there is the memory of the Korean War when everything turned to ash and education became the one ladder that could carry you across class lines. The generation that holds those desperate memories still runs this society. And here's the painful part. That ladder has long since become a tool for handling down privilege that's already locked in place. But the old memory inside us still points the same way. On top of all the history, a religion settled in, the religion of meritocracy. The philosopher Michael Sandel wrote a book called The Tyranny of Merit. Our society treats the idea, meritocracy, like a faith. We know the starting lines are different for everyone. We know that. But instead of trying to close the gap, we just grab the result and announce, this is ability, this is what you've earned. And then we ask the people who lost to bow out gracefully. Like any religion, this one doesn't allow argument. Work hard and you will make it. When it doesn't work out, that promise turns into, you just didn't try hard enough. And it shuts the mouth of anyone who wants to question the system itself. That's why one little phrase, I went to Sky, can make a whole room go quiet. Sky is what Korean calls the three most prestigious universities, Seoul National, Korea, and Yonsei. Behind the reaction, there's something very human. I worked so hard for this, so it has to mean something. It has to be important. Otherwise, all those years at a desk feel like they were for nothing. When self-love is mixed with belief, it can turn into something harmful. The more certain a person is of themselves, the harder it is for them to notice when their own standard becomes a kind of pressure pushes onto someone else. And here's what hurts more. This belief damages even the winners. The moment a person who won on a title field decides, this was all my effort, they stop being able to see the invisible things that held them up. They lose any reasons to be humble. And the warmth they might have felt for the people below them disappears too. So they hand the same title field to the next generation without feeling even a flicker of guilt. We live in a time when showing off your wealth, what people called flexing, has become a kind of virtue. Once an American friend asked me what the Suneung was. I told them it's like taking the SAT, the ACT, and the GRE all crammed into one exam. Then he asked how long the test lasts. I said, 1 day a year, 8 hours. His eyes went wide. He asked how long people prepare for it. And my answer was just one word: forever. I still remember the look on my friends' faces when they ran out of things to say. More than any chart or statistic, that one word shows what this system really is. So, is this only a Korean disease? No, it isn't. When Michael Sandel wrote his book, he was actually writing about America, the Ivy League admissions race, class passed down from parent to child, and elites who still believe I got here on my own. Daniel Markovits pointed to the same picture in his book, The Meritocracy Trap. And in Britain, Oxford and Cambridge have been reproducing the class system for centuries. China has the Gaokao. Japan has its own exam wars. Singapore, too. They all share this structure where one test splits a life in two. But Korea still stands out, and there are reasons. The first is the speed of our growth. Other countries took centuries to build their class structures. We passed through it in just 1 or 2 generations. The myth of meritocracy hardened before anyone had time to test whether it was even true. And the people who really did climb up through studying, whose success stories are still fresh and alive, are sitting right now in the parents' seat. The second reason is that we have so few other stories to tell. In the US and in parts of Europe, there is a path to a respected life that doesn't run through university. The stigma on choosing vocational training, craft, farming, or art is lighter than it is here. Korea slowly tore those other paths down until only one competition track was left. The third reason is what happens when Confucian hierarchy and meritocracy stack on top of each other. We get a moral pressure that says accepting your result quietly is a virtue. In the West, getting angry at the rigged result and pushing back is seen as a legitimate political act. For us, it often gets read as a loser's excuse. The disease is the same, but in Korea it spread the fastest, and it hardened into the tightest, smallest space. And all of this weight, in the end, lands on the smallest shoulders. In 2024, 221 Korean students from elementary school to high school took their own lives. It's the hardest number since records began. 2 high school girls in Busan died together. In the note they left behind, they wrote about the pressure of grades. For 12 years now, suicide has been the leading cause of death among Korean teenagers. In front of numbers like this, many psychiatrists and psychologists have described Gangnam, Korea's wealthiest education district, as something like a giant psychiatric ward. And honestly, that's not an exaggeration. Our children are unhappy. Their self-esteem is low, but their pride is high. Self-esteem is that quiet feeling rising up from inside that says, I'm okay just as I am. But this system, from the moment a child opens their eyes, keeps sending the opposite signal. You are not enough yet. Do more. The soil that self-esteem needs to grow in is never even prepared. Instead, only pride grows. And pride always looks outward. It can only prove yourself by finding someone below to look down on. When you look closely at this picture, you start to see something else. You see others fighting their own battles behind the faces of their children. There are parents who never got into Seoul National University who feel they have been dismissed their whole lives because of it. And they try to fill the old wound with their child's report card. At the bottom of the feeling, there's a deep shame cut into them by the very same system. Without ever facing their own wound, they push the child forward to finish the story they never got to write. In Korean society, your university name traps you from 2 directions. If you don't get in, it stays with you as a lack forever. If you do get in, the name becomes the standard, and the moment you fall even slightly short of it, you are read as a failure. Do well, and people say, of course, you went to that university. Do poorly, and they say, you went to that university and that's all you've got? Neither side is free. In a society where one university name defines a whole person, even the ones who benefit end up as victims. Only a parent who knows that in their own body can make the hard choice not to pass the same chains to their child. My dad was born the eldest son of a poor family, and he got into a top university. My grandmother treated his university like a magic key, like it would lift the whole family up. My dad loves soccer, and he's really good at drawing cartoons. Sometimes I imagine, what if he'd done what he actually loved? What if he hadn't chosen a major he had no interest in, no talent for, just to get into a top university? How different would his life have been? That's why I'm so grateful. He went to a top university himself, and he never once forced a university names onto me. It was a rare decision, the kind only someone who felt those chains on their own body could make. Because of my dad's choice, I get to live freely and happily now. Parents believe that protecting a child from failure ahead of time is love. No, they believe it's a skill, a competence. But that isn't love. It's closer to a parent who simply can't bear to watch their own child fail. The strength to handle failure grows in a specific way. You touch the bottom yourself. You get up on your own. And somewhere in that process, you realize in your body, I'm someone who can survive this. It's a muscle no one can build for you. And right now, we are taking even the chance to build that muscle away from our children. So a child who's never once fallen apart, when they finally meet a failure their parents can no longer block, just collapses. The children who grow up never falling down eventually take the seats that meritocracy set aside for them. They become doctors, judges, and prosecutors, politicians, journalists, CEOs. They might be clever, but there's an emptiness where wisdom should be. Because wisdom is shaped slowly out of failure, reflection, and real encounters with other people. And these are the ones who skipped all of that. Empathy doesn't grow either. Empathy is that feeling that's born when you've been weak yourself, when you've come undone. For someone who's never been there, standing quietly in the place of a person who's fallen apart is not easy. From the outside, their lives might look full, but inside, the lack is even greater. People who've never really lived in the world, never experienced it, are the ones designing this world. So it's no surprise that the policies, the rulings, and the news they produce keep missing the shape of our actual lives. And above all, they form a cartel. People who share the same lack recognize each other in an instant, and they protect each other. Inside the circle, the lack stops looking like a lack. It becomes the standard. So there's no power left to look at themselves honestly. The language to say we were wrong was never there to begin with. From my experience, even Korea's indie music scene, which seems to speak the language of resistance the most frequently, is tied up in this prestigious university cartel. And in education, it's even tighter. The people who hold the power to change the education system are the ones who benefited from it the most. The handle of reform is held by the beneficiaries, not the victims. And that's exactly why we can hardly ever move forward. I've always lived outside the system. After I graduated from university, I never once mentioned where I went because no one ever asked. I loved the music, so while I was a student, I worked at the club in Hongdae. Then, by luck, in my early 30s, I became a late blooming editor at a tiny new indie magazine. I loved the work, so I threw myself into it. And one day, a big fashion magazine reached out and asked me to come work with them. I asked the editor-in-chief why he wanted to bring me in. And he said this: because of the life you've lived, your experience, the kind of eye that can read the time a person has passed through instead of their university name. A person with a kind of eye should be the one running the magazine, and society, and country. But in Korea, somehow that's become the rare exception. The real problem with Korean credentialism isn't that people prefer a good university. It's that it reaches back and pins a person's whole value to one exam at 19. And it erases the 20, 30 years of life that came after. That's why in Korea, when people meet someone for the first time, they easily ask a rude question. Which university did you go to? Everyone knows that one answer changed the weight and the direction of the whole conversation. And still, no one can stop. For the last 10 years, I left Seoul and wandered the world, meeting all kinds of people. And not one of them asked about my schooling. Instead, we opened with this: who are you? Tell me your story. Because sorting someone into a box, they wanted to see the person first. When I look back, my path went from a Hongdae club to a magazine editor to a writer and finally to an island on the other side of the planet. By Korean standards, it was a path where I always had to bear that look that said, it's because you weren't good enough. A society where stepping outside the system is read not as courage, but as incompetence. That's the most clever form of oppression. Instead of locking a person in a cage, it makes the one who wants to leave blame themselves. A prison you walk into on your own 2 feet and then believe you chose. Walking back out of it takes real courage. And we don't even have the words yet to call that courage what it is. I was working as a dive instructor on a small island in Thailand. A French teenager girl who was doing her dive master training joined my course as an assistant, watching and learning. After the dive, all of us sat together, beers in hand, watching the sunset. The teenage girl on a gap year and my student from Slovakia in his 20s who'd come to learn diving. They were just chatting, and then suddenly they started a heated debate about Brexit, which was the hot topic at the time. I was stunned. I just watched them for a while. And I asked how they could talk about something like this at such a young age. She told me that since she was little, school had them pick a political party they supported and debate policies. They did it regularly. I couldn't speak for a moment. At the root of that society was the ability to shape your own thoughts before handing them over. The habit of really listening to someone you disagree with. In a sense, that debate isn't about stamping out a conclusion, but about the work of the conversation itself. It was something built into the body from childhood. In Korea, we still teach children to never talk about politics. Instead of debate and real thinking, we have them memorize ready-made logic from an essay writing academy and copy it onto the answer paper. The fact that even the essay writing is learned at an academy is funny and sad at the same time. That teenage girl finished high school and took a whole year off just walking through the world. The kind of gap year is something we can barely even imagine in Korea. Now that I've lived a while, I know that 1 year in a life is almost nothing. But to us, at 20 in Korean society, that 1 year felt like a gap you could never close once you fell behind. Even that fear was planted earlier by the competition system. The heart of the resistance is always the same. The fear that while I rest for a year, everyone else will pass me by. But if everyone rested for a 1 year together, the story would be different. The fear that if I'm the only one who stops, I'm the only one who loses. That's what keeps all of us frozen in place. The resistance to gap years, the inability to quit the academies, the feet being pushed toward Daechi. The root of all of it is one and the same. No matter how wide awake one person becomes, no one can untie this knot alone. A friend who'd lived on the island for a long time told me something. In the 90s, the island didn't even have electricity. When smartphones started arriving, a small kind of unhappiness arrived with them. Comparison is an old fear for misery. And the smartphone becomes the pipeline, pumping that fear without stopping 24 hours a day. In the past, Korean society, the unit of comparison was the neighbor's son who got into sky, the kid your mom's friend was always bragging about. Now, an algorithm picks out the most shining moment in the whole world and spread them across my palm endlessly. The fence of the neighborhood got looser, but the range of comparison stretched out to the entire planet. And we pour the comparison over ourselves all day long. The watcher quietly moved into the small screen in my own hand. When you stop comparing, that's when you finally see yourself. But this society hardly ever lets you stop. The feeling that resting is laziness, the guilt of becoming someone unproductive. That's the most private mask this huge structure has left inside each one of us. One reason credentialism has survived so stubbornly in Korea is that it actually worked. A top university name led to a stable job and a high salary. And as long as the connection stays alive, the competition never stops. But right now, there's a point where the very ground under that logic is starting to shake. The people most likely to be replaced first in the age of AI are, of all people, exactly the kind of person Korea's education system works so hard to shape. Finding the set answer quickly, processing repeated information, the polished logic memorized at an academy. These are all things AI does far better than we do. 20 years of sharpening one skill through the Suneung, and it turns out that skill is the very thing AI replaces most easily. And on the other side, there are the things my generation got mocked for as useless. The friends who played in band and drew pictures. The island locals who never got higher education, but who knew how to hold the love for the world and the people in it. And the things those that French gap year girl carried. Their own language, the strength to endure failure, the ability to look at yourself without comparing. These are the things that stay hardest to replace in the age of AI. We are all becoming a little bit useless in this era anyway. And that's not only a sad thing. That uselessness the older generation left at in us, staring at a sunset for no reason, failing, sitting down and crying, drawing up meaning on your own without anyone telling you to. Those things that look so useless are exactly the most human places we have. The indie band members I met through interviews were mostly high school graduates. But the moment I sat down across from them, I met a wonderful, whole philosopher. People who sharpen their own language outside of formal education often carry sharper, more alive thinking. It's something they earn by hitting things directly, making, failing, and starting over. Something the system can never quite give. One rapper told me he grew up running freely in the countryside and his self-esteem was solid. It wasn't because he went to a top university. When a person is impressive enough on their own, a university name just doesn't enter your view. I wonder how many of these bright conversations, these moments of learning, the people who sort everyone by university name have let slip through their whole lives. A university name and the depth of a person, in the end, don't grow side by side in the same direction. So, is there really no other way? The most realistic fix is to actually flatten the university ranking. As long as there is a gap between Sky and a regional university in job rates, in starting salary, in the respect you get from society, clinging to university names is honestly the rational choice. We need to do what Germany did and genuinely place a vocational education and university education side by side with equal social standing. Removing university names from job applications, rear blind hiring, guaranteeing the wage of people who choose vocational training. All of this has to move together. It's not about adjusting one piece of the system. It's about changing the whole ecosystem of the labor market. As for what we teach, debate and philosophy classes need to become required. What's completely missing from our education is the practice of asking why. The practice of sharpening a question instead of hunting for the answer. The experience of listening to someone and finding that your own mind can change. But the moment someone tries to measure even this with a Suneung score, another academy springs up. We need the courage to teach things that can't be scored. And I'm honestly not sure we have the political will to do it. The slowest but deepest change is a culture that holds failure as a story. The story of someone who fell has to be respected. The one who came back has to be welcomed. Real lives that show other paths are truly livable have to pile up one by one. In the media, in classroom, in conversations at the dinner table. These stories have to be told again and again. We already know the rough shape of the fix. So why hasn't anything moved in 30 years? The answer is cold. The people with the power to change the system are the ones who benefited from it. The people who design what gets taught are the ones who succeeded because of what gets taught. It's not that they lack the will. It's that structurally they have no reason to let themselves go. A cartel will never untie itself with its own hands. The hand of reform is held by the beneficiaries and not the victims. And that one fact is the real reason we've been circling the same spot for 30 years. Change doesn't come from a single revolution. It's close to a slow erosion. People who walked a different path outside the system put that experience into their own words. And when those words reach enough hearts, the culture slowly shifts its place. It's slow, it's uncertain. Sometimes it even steps backward. Even so, I believe in that slow erosion. My favorite writer, James Baldwin, once said this. The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which they are being educated. If education opens your eyes, then you have to turn those eyes toward the society that raised you. To all the people in Korean society who grew up singing that Seo song with me, I want to ask, why are we so used to quietly handling the same pain down to the next generation? Why does no one stop and ask? Why does no one want to have the conversation together? And to you, Islanders, watching this video from outside Korea, I want to ask too. In your society, what is your Suneung? Does that thing where one exam at 19 decides the rest of a person's life exist in your world too? Korea's story isn't only Korea's. It points toward a bigger question we can look at together. 30 years ago, Seo already sang it. That kind of teaching is enough. We've had enough now. And yet, we've never once truly lived that out. We've never found the courage to say enough ourselves. At the very least, for our children, for next generation, shouldn't we be able to say it now? I still want to stand beside the kids in the corner of the classroom, the loud ones, the ones who keep asking inconvenient questions. And together with all of you, I want to raise my voice and say, now that really is enough. So, what did you think? I would really love to know what's on your mind. If this video spoke to you, you can support me with a like and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to support my channel, you can also join the membership. This has been Hana's Island. Here, you're safe. So until we meet again, stay easy on the island that sits at your own latitude. Take care. Bye.